Hi, I'm Chuck Wolf, and welcome to episode 10 of Place Parts. Today I'm here in Victoria Park in Newbury, Berkshire, England, United Kingdom, in order to pose some questions about compatibility going forward. Now, of course, today, in my chosen location, I'm being purposefully provocative because architectural compatibility between old and new is often where the discussion begins. And it gets even more complicated because in front of us we see a Debenham store that's only a few years old, but based on circumstances of the past few years, is about to fall out of use. What shall we do with it? Should it be housing or something else entirely? In order to answer such questions, I can't think of a better person than someone who I wrote about a bit in Sustaining a City's Culture and Character, and that's Futurecity London's Sherry Dobbin. Well, Sherry, cultural strategist extraordinaire, I have just introduced you. You don't know this, but I've introduced you with the notion that trying to figure out how we take advantage of these changing times is much more than a proposition of architectural compatibility. And when I was researching the book, you and I sat down a couple of times, and you told me about some of the approaches you have taken in your projects, both back in New York City and here in London with, I believe, your role in brokering some very cool deals with Futurecity London. And you talked about your background in drama and a sort of directorial with a small d approach to choreographing the stakeholders in reaching an optimal solution. So I would love to hear a little bit more from you about that. It's in the book, but it's really, really important in these times. So
Yeah,
please.
I think, I've often said that theater has been the best training for me in everything I do. And one of the reasons for that is because the way that we produce theater is in collaboration. Collaboration is one of the key skills. And that involves gathering people together to risk a lot of embarrassment, potential failure, not sure if you see eye to eye, but basically people come together in a commitment to take various vulnerabilities and risks to make a shared idea happen. And so I think, when we're talking about a city or a portion of a city or even a building or even just the ground floor plane, whatever it is, ultimately it's the same. You have a bunch of people who come to the table. They have different experiences, different ways of viewing things, different life experiences, different fears, might be personal, professional. And one, you have to respect all of your players. We're all collaborators. And so it's how we can understand that we take on board listening to people as far as their fantasies, what they'd love to accomplish, what they'd love to do, and also their fears or the obstacles that they see. And what you're trying to do is, one, find this shared idea, what it is you want to do together. You may not agree on everything, but you want to find that common intersection. So you work together towards a common goal. And when you identify that, well, then you can start to bring your pieces to it, and you can understand how you need everybody to make it happen. And so working, whether it's around the table or standing somewhere or doing it through these screens, it's a very similar process that a director takes.
Right.
They ask questions, they make suggestions, they discuss it, they ask for input. And a lot of times they're not necessarily driving forward their exact idea of what can happen. Sometimes they drive through a process that allows people to open up and give their ideas, but then they're seeing it, moderating it, and being able to make it cohesive, pull it together so that there is a shared outcome, basically.
Right. And as you may recall, I tried to develop, although you and I both have trouble with, I think, universal approaches that might be demanded of people. But I tried to come up with a very loosey-goosey way of characterizing some of this, and I found your analysis so helpful. And I call it learn, look, engage, assess, review, and negotiate. And then I have this idea of context keys. And somehow I see anyway a lot of community between your perspective and what I've been trying to arrive at. And so I really think it's critically important now, because if we're going to bring ourselves out of this health-based depression where we've been culturally denied, and everyone around the table understands the importance of infusing art and culture into empty spaces, victimized spaces, then I think your approach is the way to go. Let me ask you, do you have a quick example that you can talk about of how this might have played out in a project? And if the answer is no, so
well, there are several things.
Yeah.
One of my favorite examples of running a workshop to help people think this way, or to work this way, is that I pulled together people from transport infrastructure, events, marketing, arts, culture, bid leaders, businesses, et cetera, into the same workshop. And I do run this exercise called Fantasies and Fears sometimes. And we were talking about London Bridge Station, and I said,
right.
okay, forget about whether it's possible or not. What would you love to see? And we do this huge brainstorm.
Right.
The person who came up with the most extraordinary, outrageous ideas, things like, I want to see it turn into a whole aquarium one day and you just see fish floating, was the maintenance auditor, right? The one who has to be the most risk averse. But he was asked what he thought if he opened up his mind.
Right.
And then, and we went through this, and I found out that a lot of the people who often have to hold the positions of dealing with risk, because that's part of their job, often are holding on to a series of exciting things that they would love to see happen as well.
Right. And no one usually asks them what they think.
Right. And then the other thing that, I really learned, and in that same exercise, and then we go, okay, well, what are your fears? What, not just what is a challenge, but like, what's your fear? And again, one of the common fears that comes up is that this place will be like just any else, or it won't be of a great quality. Or so the thing is that you find very often that people share the same fear. And actually, I've done this exercise a lot, and the list of fears is always shorter than the list of fantasies. But very often the way we handle the process of planning, consultation, conversations, we come from a place assuming there are more conflicts than there are solutions. And so I think, that's really crucial. In Times Square, as far as a practical solution, we're dealing with one of the most, at least it's having a little bit of difficulty at the moment, but at the time that I was running the arts program, was an incredible, an economically vibrant period. And, the stakeholders are running major corporations and interests. And what we were able to do is understand wherever there was an obstacle, such as like, I don't get an audience on this night, or people think that this place might be that. We would start by working with them and saying, okay, tell me what your obstacle is. I will come up with a creative solution about how to try and answer that obstacle. And so we would work together. So we had, restaurants or venues that were always quiet on a Monday or a Tuesday or something. So we created a crazy experimental series where we brought people in, and all I did was ask for was one night out of their entire business, not a regular thing. And they gave over the venue and created, special drinks offers, things like that. And we created the most outrageous things, people doing performances on the roof of a rooftop, we turned a swimming pool into a projection screen. We had superstars, celebrities who would turn up in the smallest venues and things.
Right. Did that also lead one very cool thing, which I think got a sentence in the book, I'll blame an editor for that, is the outdoor opera
Yeah. I mean, I
In
think that's been one of the biggest, I think, litmus tests is that, our board, who wasn't even sure whether culture had relevance in a sense in the middle of Times Square. The thing that really swayed them is when a South African artist and performance artist named Robin Rode wanted to create a German expressionistic Schoenberg opera in Times Square in the winter. And and this seems like it has everything written on it as far as non-populous, not in a tourist area.
and also, shall I say, out of context, but you found a way to put it in context.
The
This idea.
context is go back to the content, go back to the idea. The idea,
Right.
the nature of the story and the narrative is that a person feels like they're standing in the middle of a chaotic contemporary world that is oppressing them, and they don't know where to turn and they don't know what to do. And once I heard this proposition, I'm like, of course, we sandwich you in one of the busiest areas of Times Square with the screens flashing and people coming out of the subway and people going to work, and you're in that environment. Of course you can understand what
Mm-hmm.
this character is going through. And so this just goes full circle into what I was saying about collaborator.
Right.
Space is a collaborator. Your
Mm-hmm.
space is a collaborator. It is part of anything you do if you put arts out in that public space. The art is also a collaborator with the architecture, with the people who are there, with the functioning of the city, with the light. What
Right.
happened is that we completely scared away all of the people who were there as costume characters trying to get tips and stuff, because everybody was watching an opera. They'd never seen this kind of orchestration and voice happen so close to them,
Right.
but they were just amazed.
Well,
And
as I recall, you also took some themes from within the opera and essentially converted the New York
yeah, the moonlight.
physical landscape to fit within the theme, which this is
Yeah, the
where I really
moonlight.
get excited, bridging the physical with the cultural. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean the artist saw that the moonlight was the electronic screens,
Right.
showing down the forest, that she's supposed to be in the middle of, or translated to like jungle or concrete jungle, the tall trees and being amongst them. Those are the skyscrapers that are all around you.
Right.
And so, this is something that theater people do all the time. But they usually create a world.
Right.
um, what we're talking about is a theater. I did an exhibition in Moscow for the State Theater about all the work that we had done in Times Square. And I called it Times Square Theater of the Absurd. Because
Mm-hmm.
an absurdist drama, basically, there's no beginning and there's no end. You're
Right.
thrown into the middle. You're
Yeah.
not sure why you're there. The oddest cast of characters are wandering around.
Yeah.
You don't know what it all means, but yet it's absolutely entrancing. And
I'm smiling because doesn't that remind you of something we've all been dealing with for a while now? Isn't it right? Well, Sherry, thanks again. The way you look at things is always so inspiring in trying to figure out how to create places that are going to resonate over time, involving as many people as possible and as many of the tensions that surround and embrace public space. So.
thank
Thanks
you,
again.
and thanks for understanding how arts and culture play a part in our everyday life of our cities.
So I hope you've enjoyed this episode 10 with Sherry. We, of course, didn't solve the problem of what to do with this Debenhams, but we did talk about some approaches that may benefit us all in going a little bit deeper into how we resolve the opportunities that we're faced with over the next several months to emerge into at least a modified understanding of what place can be. We'll see you next week here on Place Parts.